Live streaming is on.
Hello, world. My name is Gerry Fialka. Today is February 19, 2021. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with Clint Ignatoff, facilitating from wild parties in Canada. And we are honored to have James Preston Allen with us. James, what a pleasure. Thanks for being with us.
Glad to be here.
The first question is, James, what's the best thing for a human being?
Well, who knows? I think we're all basically different, but you know, the one thing that has become prominently evident with the current pandemic is that the one thing that we all share in common is biology.
Very good. I've never had that answer in 35 years of doing that, and that is a really good word. And I loved your first two words, who knows, because that recalls the great Fats Waller. One never knows, does one?
Yeah.
So, James, what's your favorite form of information, how it comes into you?
Well, it sort of depends on what it is that you are investigating. I read a hard copy newspaper every day. I tend to get a lot of sort of broad spectrum of information through the internet. And then if I really want to delve into a particular subject matter, you can, basically do a search on your computer to find out, specific detail. I use that a lot in my editorial writing. But frankly, the things that I retain the most come from reading a book like this one. I read this during the first part of the pandemic, which is talking about the last great pandemic, which was the Spanish flu in 1918. This was a world of information for someone that is not very well educated in the science of epidemiology, and pandemics. There was a world of information here that I had never been taught in a biology class.
Well put, James. Why do you think humans collect or gather information?
Oh, because we have a natural curiosity.
So you think it's innate in us to collect information, or did we invent that?
Oh, I think evolution basically co-created the natural ability to ask questions and to start finding out answers. And I don't think that kind of intelligence is native to the Homo sapiens.
Do thoughts create emotions?
No. Or do emotions create thoughts? That's a coin toss.
It's a good way to answer. If you answer a question with a question, you win. So we're all done. Thank you. No.
Yeah.
Do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
I've often said that happiness is overrated. By that, I mean, people who tell you, well, just go do what makes you feel happy. And I don't think that happiness brings satisfaction necessarily. I think people are mostly looking for something that gives them meaning in life. And so the real trick is to do something that gives you meaning that also has that element of pleasure in it. Playing music is like that.
I agree. I play music too, and the great verb there is play. We don't work music, we play music.
Right, right. Visual artists also um, uh, exhibit a certain amount of just outright play in what they do. And the deal is that it changes the scope and the elasticity of what we consider time. And most people are stuck on a 24-hour clock type of thing, and particularly if they are linear thinkers and people who use the other side of the brain oftentimes exhibit sort of being lost in the moment. And you see this with jazz musicians who are improvising. You see this with people who get lost in the creative process, perhaps writers. And you can either stretch or condense the mechanism of time in such a way that you can do more, or you can concentrate infinitely on a certain thing. Okay. And suddenly time passes, and it may be hours or it might be minutes, but it may seem like, you have changed how the clock is ticking.
Really well put. We call that all at onceness. Both James Joyce and Frank Zappa said all times are happening now. It's like be here now, being in the present. Does the brain more detect consciousness or more create consciousness?
Well, good question. They're doing a whole lot of studies down at the University of Irvine these days on memory. And the first thing that tipped me off to considering memory and what it means to us was when my late mother started to forget things. And then I read a book called The Woman Who Couldn't Forget. And the interesting part about that particular book is that it documented, actually, I think it was like an autobiography. And this woman was part of a study at UC Irvine in the project about memory, because there's a small percentage of human beings who actually remember just about everything. And this woman wrote this book about how it was that she could go back to like her early teenage years and tell you exactly what was on TV on May 31st, 1964. And not just the one program that stood out, but she could give you the whole, schedule. And I started reading her narrative and realized that, we are defined as much by what we remember as by what we forget. And I started thinking about that in context of my my mother, and I started thinking about it in terms of myself, and realizing that memory, both what we remember and what we forget, both define us in terms of our humanity. Now, your question is do thoughts? Repeat the question again.
Does the brain more detect consciousness or create consciousness?
Yeah. And that's sort of like the question, a similar question of, is there, what is man's spiritual nature? You know, is it defined by our physical being or by some, supernatural force?
Yeah.
All I can tell you is that God is not like anything any religion has explained to mankind heretofore. There was a recent set of experiments done at the CERN linear accelerator in Switzerland that proved one element of physics, and it's called the Boggs-Hosson theory.
Right.
And the Boggs-Hosson theory is that when these subatomic particles collide, when the energy out of the universe collides, it creates matter. And the scientists' shorthand for this is called the God theory. And they were able to capture a picture of these neutrons colliding and creating this spark. And that's probably about the closest anybody has ever come to seeing, quote unquote, God. But it doesn't look like any of the pictures in any of the religious texts.
I love that. That was well put. What's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
Probably light.
There's a poet, Audre Lorde, who said, you can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools. Yvonne Rainer responded, you can if you expose the tools. What new tool do you suggest in any context? You could refer it to the quotes or in any other context.
Well, let's see. Recently, you had a group of online investors with Robinhood who basically took down the hedge funds who were shorting the market on the GameStop.
Yeah.
And they were basically using capitalist investment tools to take down several major capitalist hedge funds. They lost billions of dollars in the process. The hedge funds did. And some of these, quote, day trader investors made millions. So, frankly, it's... I'll give you another example. So we were all aware of the rise of TikTok, right? You know, the dance application. Yes. And so what happened when Donald Trump held his Oklahoma campaign rally, right?
Yeah.
Well, a whole bunch of TikTok followers signed up to go to his mass rally, and never intended on actually going, right? That is a way of using the tools of the master to basically take down the house.
Dude, those were great 2 examples. So Marshall McLuhan learned from Ezra Pound that artists are the antenna of the race. They're broadcasting the hidden psychic events. Excuse me. They're broadcasting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions so we can learn how to cope with our effects. But McLuhan was probing why do humans ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though we can look to the artist to reveal them to us?
Well, it's been years since I've read any Marshall McLuhan. He was an important influence in my early life. But what I can tell you about art is this, is that for the most part, artists are using a different, they use the other side of the brain for the most part. There are some of us artists who have actually adapted to using both sides of the brain. And those artists are good at both math and art. Okay. But there is a cross-pollination between, say, music and mathematics.
Yeah.
Or visual arts and certain elements of science. Now, I think the really brilliant scientists actually mistakenly or perhaps intentionally step into the artistic realm in discovering new things. But it's the artists that see sort of the future, or oftentimes are more sensitive to the future. In which case, you would call them sort of visionaries. And so the guy that developed the radio never really understood what Groucho Marx was going to do with it. Nor could he.
Yeah.
Right? You know, so.
Well, that's the psychic effects. That's exactly it. So, James, this is fun. You're really articulate, and I appreciate your time. Well, are you more afraid of old ideas or more afraid of new ideas?
Oh, most people are afraid of just about everything.
But what about
they're afraid of living, and they're so scared, they're afraid of dying that they're afraid to live. So the old ideas are the past, and the new ideas are the future. And I think what I'm afraid of is people who think they know what the future is without understanding the past. And so, as they say, if you don't understand the history, you're bound to repeat it. I think what we're living in right now is an era in which there is a collective amnesia about anything that is, maybe older than, 5 days ago, or maybe even 5 minutes ago. And of course, it takes, historians or maybe even legal scholars to say, well, you know what, guys? This is how many times that we've impeached a president. And the time that we should have really impeached a president was Richard Nixon. But he resigned before they could actually get the articles of impeachment together, and that might have solved a lot of the dilemma that we're currently going through. But we didn't. But if you don't remember to remember, then you're sort of always lost in the fog of the present. And it's the people who have not only the knowledge of the past, but a toolbox on how to fix things, who are the ones that end up solving the current problems.
Well put. Tell me your earliest memory or one of them.
Fishing for trout on Flathead Lake in Montana.
Is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
Well, as we talked about earlier, we are defined by what we remember and what we forget. And the lesson that I got from the book, The Woman Who Couldn't Forget, was, can you imagine living in the present and being able to remember an infinite amount of detail about everything that happened in your life? That, to me, would be a curse.
Yeah.
And yet there's some people who very effectively could tell you exactly what they told you, when you were 15 years old, word for word, and you'd go, Christ, I don't remember that. Yeah. So, are you better off for having forgot it? Well, perhaps. I think what our mind does is, and this is a self-preservation thing. Our mind tends to block out things that are painful, things that are unpleasant, perhaps. And yet, some of the most unpleasant things stand out, okay? And other things that are, but, most of life is pretty much sort of like raking leaves, it's just sort of it's just sort of the business of cleaning up the yard, and most of that's pretty damn boring,
No,
so,
I like raking leaves, and I also like sweeping my kitchen floor. It's very meditative.
well, sure, they're sort of mindless activities, but can you remember the difference between raking the floor on or sweeping the floor on Monday versus Wednesday, unless the cat threw up on it or something, so it's, I mean, I think people generally tend to want to live for that, moment that is memorable.
Yeah.
At some high point. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
But then we also remember, the day that my favorite car got destroyed in a car accident.
Yeah.
Very
good. So, James, tell me an early role model within your immediate family, someone who made an impact on you, and just briefly, what was that impact?
Immediate family or immediate circle of people?
Well, no, the second part is outside your immediate family. But first of all, within your immediate family, who made an impact on you? And, what was that impact? Just briefly.
Oh, it was more than likely my mother, who I think knew how to raise boys better than she knew how to raise girls.
And what was the impact on you? That's a great compliment to her, that she even knows how to raise kids. But what do you think you learned or got from her?
No, that sort of thing is all about self-love.
What does self-love mean, in other words?
It's acceptance of who you are, as opposed to what other people think you are.
Yeah.
Now, outside of that, I will tell you a fascinating story. So when I was in high school, in my sophomore year, we started publishing an off-campus newspaper, which, of course, at the time was completely against all of the rules. And we were able to do this without the administration's knowledge, because we would surreptitiously bring them onto campus and distribute them. And this drove the vice principal crazy. He was always trying to figure out who it was that was doing this dastardly thing, because, you know, we were writing stuff that was anti-administration and, you know, pro-student rights. It was anti-Vietnam War. I mean, there was this whole list. And about 4 years ago, I actually found one of these things in an archive. And at a high school reunion, I printed up a bunch of them and passed them out. I said, guys, anybody remember this? Well, in my junior year, there was a very smart social study teacher who picked up on the fact that the kids were all reading this rag that we put out, okay, on a mimeograph machine, no less, okay? If anybody remembers what a mimeograph machine was. And so he started asking the right questions to the right people. And you see, he ran an honors social studies class. Now, there's no way in hell that in my junior year I qualified to be in an honors anything. But he talked to the counselor and got me in his class, because he wanted to have somebody in his class that would challenge what the curriculum was. And he knew, you know, he just knew that I was going to do that. Okay. Which I did, you know. Well, I mean, he gave us lots of, you know, things to read, like The Affluent Society, and what's that other book on the other side of the equation? Democracy and Freedom by Milton Friedman. Well, just those two books alone on sort of economic philosophy, I have repeatedly used in my thinking for my entire adult life. And because I was in the honors social studies class, I got a special invitation to go to this wealthy matron's salon, and met John Kenneth Galbraith in person, the author of The Affluent Society. You know, one of the great liberal economists, you know, of the first half of the 20th century. And that was astounding, you know. I mean, you know, wow. So all these years later, after I've been publishing the newspaper, this was about 10 years ago, I went on a search to find that professor of mine. And I tracked him all the way down to, what was it, Temple University in Texas. And I actually got all the way, and I even found a home phone number for him. And when I called up, you know, I asked if, you know, if Mr. Wooten was there, you know, and the woman on the other end says, "I don't care if I ever see that man again." Apparently, they had a not very a friendly divorce.
Well, that was a great story. I'm think that he had a big impact on your life and enabling you to pursue a lot of what you pursue. James, did your parents raise you a particular religion?
Well, yes. My parents were Unitarians, and that takes a little bit of explaining for probably most of your listeners. Is that you can explain it this way. When a Unitarian knocks on your door wanting to proselytize, they have nothing to say.
That's sort of Zen.
Yeah. So
did you?
So the deal is that a lot of my belief system, I think, was encouraged and brought about because they had this this creed of not saying that they had the truth, but it was the search for the truth.
Yeah.
And so there were these salons that were held in the church library, in which we learned about existentialism, and we heard the names of great philosophers and writers, the theologians like Martin Buber, and the existentialists like Sartre, and I mean, it's stuff that I was never going to get this going to your average high school.
Yeah.
I mean, this was like, college level, sort of like religious philosophy, and literature. And I pretty much just absorbed all of that. And it made me probably far more curious about myself and, humans in general, much more so than my, any of my siblings, or perhaps most of the people I went to high school with.
Well put. Now, if God does exist, what do you want God to tell you after you die?
Well, what I didn't tell you about all of this is that I'm a devout atheist.
Oh, I understand.
And what I will tell you is that does not exclude the premise of innate human spirituality. In which case, you then have to say, you have to ask the question in a different way. Is God an external thing, or is God an internal thing?
Yeah.
And the issue there comes back to the Boggs-Hosen theory, which is that there is an ongoing creation. You see, all of this energy that bombards our planet every single second of every day. I mean, millions and millions of these neutrons, or whatever they're called, and they collide. They collide all around us. And the issue is that means that at the core of every religion is the idea of God creating man. And if the physics are true, that you have, hundreds of millions, billions maybe, of these electrons colliding every single second of the day and creating some form of matter, then the miracle of creating life is happening every second of every day, even while you and I are sitting here chatting on this on this Zoom link. Now, that is and does exclude a whole lot of the mumbo jumbo about God and religion.
Yeah.
And it just may open up a door as to saying that what happens in the afterlife is simply an exchange of energy. And so your next question should be, if the animating force of man is somehow embedded in what we call the soul, what happens to the soul after death, after the death of the physical body?
Like that. I'd answer like Paul Krasner.
And the answer to that question is, I'll get back to you when I know.
Paul Krasner said, I only believe in life in the former life. And what if the past life? Anyways, we're getting an echo there.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. I don't know what's happening. Do evil people exist? Or does evil use people as gift?
Oh, I think most people are have the capacity to do good and evil, and I think that a small percentage. Well, let me put it to you like this. Most people's belief structure puts them in a place where human psychology forces them to do something because they know it's right. And some like 98% or 99% of human beings are only going to do the things they believe are right. Now, I do believe that there's that 1% of the human race that will do things that they know are absolutely not right, that are evil, malicious, downright murderous, dastardly, you know. But I cannot say that even they do it because they've justified it being right. Now, most of what people do that is bad is probably they justify by doing what they think is right. And so the whole judgment of good and bad, you know, is one that is on a spectrum of good and evil. And I can't say that everything that a good person does, you know, whether they're Mahatma Gandhi or Dr. Martin Luther King or, you know, you name a saint, whether or not everything that they did was absolutely good. No, they're, you know, I mean, human beings are flawed. And we are known as much by our flaws as we are by the things that, you know, that are good.
Well put. How do you advise someone to deal with an enemy?
Say that again.
How do you advise someone to deal with an enemy?
I don't think I've ever been asked. The truth of the matter is that you either, I mean, there's two human conditions, fight or flight. And I imagine it all depends on whether or not your enemy's bigger than you.
Okay, I'm going to try to deal with the echo. James Joyce was the first in Dublin. He checked out.
He checked out.
He said, "This is
He
stupid.
said, "This is stupid.
Why should I go inside
Why
a
should I
building
go inside a building
and see a movie of a
and see a
tree
movie of a tree
when I can go
when I
outside
can go outside
and see a real
and
tree?"
see a real tree?
Faulkner said,
Faulkner said,
"Sometimes the best
"Sometimes
fiction
the best fiction
is more true than
is more true
journalism.
than journalism.
Why do we have to
Why do we have
recreate
to
them
recreate them
in order to get them?"
in order to get them?"
So there is the issue of what is truth, and sometimes the greater truth is told by telling you something that is fiction. Are some of our best writers, like Faulkner, can tell you a bigger truth by making up a story. I would refer you to the preface of one of Faulkner's plays called Requiem for a Nun. I mean, he's notorious for very long sentences, but I think that the beginning of that play, which I'm not recommending reading the entire play because I thought it was somewhat boring, but the introduction to that was something like 2.5, 3.5 pages. That was one sentence, perfectly punctuated, that gave you the entire setting of where this particular event took place. Now, I'm sure that he made some of that up. The other thing is, though, is that sometimes shit happens in life that you can't make up. And it is more real than some of the best fiction that you can imagine. So you sort of have to sort all of that kind of stuff out, both as a creative person and as a viewer.
James, tell us what first attracted you to both playing music and making visual art.
Playing music?
Both of them. Playing music and visual art. Tell us your truth.
Well, let's see. I think I always liked to draw. And in fact, I sort of had this idyllic idea that the perfect life would be just to simply get paid for drawing pictures. But when I was barely a teenager, I was at the Unitarian summer camp and got to hear Pete Seeger play the banjo. And I was so inspired by his banjo playing that my mother bought me my first banjo.
Nice. So you pursued art and music your whole screenwriting told me. Great art is when you can see the intention of the maker. Kubrick says the opposite. What role does intention play in your creative process?
What's more important than intention is mindfulness. in the process of creating something. More often than not, if you start off intending to do one thing, and you are so intent on that being the thing that you do, you miss what happens along the way. And I would often argue that the mistakes that one makes in trying to do something that is perfect oftentimes become more important than what the original intent was.
Well put.
Well put.
Marcel Duchamp says, there's no art without an audience. How much do you think of your audience? 3 ways: when you're making music, art, and newspaper.
Well, one always has to consider who might hear it. Making visual art is much more solitary. Playing music or performing music, different from actually creating the original music itself, is a much more public exercise. And writing, for the newspaper is you always sort of have to have in your mind who you're writing for. And so the last of these oftentimes impacts the way in which I will write something or an idea. And with the music, I am writing it in a way that it'll be understood when it's performed. And with making physical art, I'm not sure that it matters that there is an audience. I might disagree with Duchamp.
Yeah. He was a prankster anyway.
Well, he was. It was probably one of the more intellectual of the early Cubists and then Dadists, and his work, along with many of the other Dadists, has had a major impact on how I make art.
Me too. What was the motive of the cave artist?
It was mostly religious. I studied cave art in California. There are multiple examples of that still exist. The pictographs, as they're called, as opposed to petroglyphs. The pictographs are mostly sort of like their Sistine Chapel. They're trying to explain, how the universe relates to man. And most of these sites have something to do with a perhaps religious experience, perhaps even imbued by or influenced by the taking of psychedelics.
James, what's more important? Conviction or compromise?
Oh, I think the better question is what's more important, persistence or genius? Now, what I can tell you is that in the everyday life of mankind, persistence wins out. However, if you are in the creative field, you have to have that 1% genius, and then be willing to persist at it.
It's good. Is perception reality?
Is perception reality? Well, did you ever read The Doors of Perception by Aldous Huxley?
Yes.
Yes.
So what he explained in that book is that our mind, which is influenced by our vision, hearing, and all that, is sort of like a valve. And it sort of like takes all of these millions of senses, light, sound, taste, feel, takes all of that stuff and then narrows it way down to something that we can comprehend. Okay. Because, frankly, if you were aware of every, if you walked out the door tonight and were to see everything that your eyeball could see, it would blow your mind. And this is what happens when, as Aldous Huxley experimented with, I think was it mescaline or peyote or something like that. That when you open up that mind valve, okay, you experience what most people would call hallucinations, because you're seeing all of that input, you're hearing all of that input, and it's more than what the normal state of your mind can process, and so it becomes this bigger thing. So no, people's perception is not necessarily reality, which is why when you have when you're working in science, you have these tools to verify a perception and to check and recheck on certain things. And the simple math on that in journalism is sort of like triangulation. It's sort of the rough navigation of finding out the truth. Find a fixed point over there, a fixed point over here, and then a fixed point over there, and someplace in the middle. I mean, this is sort of like, navigation. Someplace in the middle, you'll find the truth. Now, it may not be a specific truth unless you can get enough points of reference, but it is a greater truth than one perspective.
Robert Evans, the movie producer, says there's your story, my story, and the truth, and none of them are lying.
Well, again, I don't think most people wake up in the morning thinking that they're going to tell everybody that they meet that day a lie. I even think that Donald Trump thinks that he's telling the truth. Okay, even when we know that he's been lying. And that is because, once again, people don't believe that they can be wrong. It's part of the human psychology. Okay. Now, me telling you what I'm telling you today, okay, and you telling me what you are telling me today, I don't take it as being like the ultimate truth, okay, that I'm right and you're wrong kind of thing. Now, this is a conversation in which we discover nuances between what you think and what I think. And we might come to a joint conclusion of something that might approximate the truth. But, our grasp on what truth really is very loose. I mean, we've got, lots of books on religion and lots of books on philosophy, blah, blah, but all you can really do as a creative individual is to speak your truth and to see if that resonates with an audience or the world or,
Well put.
Well put.
Marcel Proust's question. On what occasion do you lie?
Oh, everybody will lie some of the time. It's sort of the reverse of Abraham Lincoln. Everybody lies some of the time. All of the people will lie a little bit most of the time. Okay. Well, Mr. Clinton, did the intern give you a blowjob? I didn't have sex with her.
But I'm asking you, James, on what occasion do you lie?
Officer, I didn't see the stop sign. I mean, most of the time people will, shade the truth. And perhaps I didn't see the stop sign. Okay. But it's oftentimes the small lies that people tell themselves and then tell others. But frankly, I find it easier just not to say something. Now, your next question should be, can you lie by being silent?
That's a very good question. They asked McLuhan, will there ever be silence?
No idea. Not as long as there's two people in the same room.
Very good. And let's get your ideas on Louis.
No.
I'm for anyone who seeks the truth, but I part ways when they claim they found it.
Well, that gets back to my Unitarian training, is that is the creed of searching for the truth. But the problem with the finding the truth, okay, sort of presumes that there's only one truth. And that's why one should be doubtful about finding the truth. It's sort of like finding the God, or, the root of all evil.
A poet said that poetry is outing your inner dialogue. What language is your inner dialogue in?
Well, it gets translated into English fairly easily. It's I presume that with most poets, it's their mother tongue, but it probably predates language. Most poetry.
What's the function of poetry?
Well, poetry is that thing that comes before you actually end up writing a novel. So it's kind of preparatory work for, and some people never get out of the preparatory work. But it's a form of meditation. I think it is a listening to your inner voice, and some people have a hard time getting it out.
Moshe Feldenkrais's work with healing and movement. He says it's literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength. Can you tell me a weakness you've turned into a strength?
Huh. Well, I probably could. It'd take me a little bit longer than what we're allotted here, but I could go in a number of different directions with that. Let's go on to the next question.
What's the difference between rights and responsibilities?
Well, as we have learned recently, they're kind of connected at the hip. In America, we believe that we were born with certain inalienable rights for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. What is not embedded in that concept is that your rights end at my nose. And that's the responsibility of exercising rights. I.e., you may have free speech, but you do not have the right to scream fire in a crowded theater. Certain of your liberties are not absolute. And therein is the responsibility of having restraint in exercising your liberties. It's also why we have courtrooms.
James, what's the difference between rebellion and revolution?
Well, I would imagine that on the one hand, probably the dictionary would be better at that than I am, but a rebellion would be to rebel against the status quo, to execute change. And a revolution is basically executed to overthrow an existing power or regime. One is about change, the changing within a power structure, and the other is doing in the power structure.
Utah Phillips says anarchy is making rules for yourself, not others. Who is entitled to make the rules?
Well, I like Utah Phillips. He was an influence on some of my songwriting. Now, I'm not so sure that I am a advocate of anarchy, but each of us sets up our own rules. You know, I mean, when you wake up in the morning, what do you do first? You know, you have a routine, and you sort of set up a routine, and that are your, you know, personal rules and whatnot. But as soon as you get in your car and drive to the grocery store, you have to set up with another set of rules that you have adopted, hopefully. Otherwise, somebody gets killed, you know, at the first intersection. So, you know, much of life is determined by a certain set of sort of personal anarchy, or perhaps liberty. And there's a whole bunch of stuff that we have internalized that is what I call laws based upon enlightened self-survival, i.e., governments can pass all the laws that they want. They can, you know, they can try to micromanage people. But there's no nation on the face of the earth that has enough policemen to watch you every single day of every single moment. And so the only laws that actually are enforceable are the laws that people adopt for their own self-protection. And the perfect, what I call these are stop sign laws. Okay. You can't have enough police officers at every stop sign to see when somebody is going to run that stop sign. The stop sign is there for the self-preservation of the vast majority of people. And do people run stop signs? Yes, absolutely. In California, we call it a California stop. That's where you downshift into second and just sort of glide through the intersection, hoping that there's nobody around. Now, but the stop sign is still there, and people all recognize what the stop sign is for. And if they get caught running a stop sign, you know, that's sort of like, okay, you know, like that's a ticket you don't really fight.
John Basil Barnhill said, where the people fear the government, you have tyranny. Where the government fears the people, you have liberty. How do you personally handle false fears like the war on drugs, the war on poverty, the war on terrorism?
Well, it seems like every time we try to fix anything, first we declare a war on it, and then within the most recent time, we then appoint a czar to run the war. Now, frankly, let's say the war on drugs. The war on drugs was a complete fabrication by the Nixon administration that was created because he could no longer do illegal things to put both anti-war demonstrators and black people in jail for anything because for demonstrating. Okay, basically. So the war on drugs was created, and then you put somebody in charge, and then they spent the next 40 years prosecuting a war that wasn't really a war, but created more crime and created more addiction because of the war on drugs, and never really solved any problem except that it put more people in jail than ever before. So the problem is that in these here United States of America, there's always been this somewhat awkward dance between the government being afraid of the people and the people being afraid of the government. And that is a very imperfect balance in this country. And I don't think that that this country has yet figured it out. And sometimes the people can be wrong.
Yeah. Anger can be a productive emotion when fill in the blank.
Anger is a very powerful emotion. And when you are angry enough to get something done, it is a motivator for getting off your ass and doing something about it. I mean, remember Mothers Against Drunk Drivers or MAD? They were mad, you know, and they basically got a whole lot of enhancements on drunk driving, you know, that changed a few things.
What does courage mean now?
What has courage always meant? The problem is that I've written this before. You cannot teach courage. You can only learn it from other people that provide examples. And basically, it comes down to a form of self-sacrifice that you do, not because there's some sort of natural reward. You know, it's sort of like the story I read yesterday about a young soldier in who's getting a post office named after him, who in the middle of a battle in Vietnam saved his unit by taking a grenade and holding it to his body, in which case he got blown to smithereens. You know, now that kind of is not a rational thing to do, right? But he got the red badge of courage for doing that from the military.
Yeah. James, how do we stop our governments from going to war?
I don't think that you can. I think that you can minimize the kind of warfare that gets done, and that basically comes from changing the national budget.
5 Alan Watts questions, just briefly in a few words. Who started it all?
Well, I imagine it's the Great Bang Theory.
Are we going to make it?
Oh, I think we already have. We just don't realize it.
Where do we put it?
Where do we put it?
Yeah.
We put it in its place.
Who's cleaning it up?
The guy who's following the elephant.
Is it serious?
Only if you take it as being serious.
Funny, I think the echo went away. Do you still hear it?
Well, you're on a Wi-Fi delay, actually. So
I see.
You're not quite synced with your lips.
Oh, that's all right. But are you hearing the echo?
No.
Oh, good. Boy, we can talk normal. I'm sorry about that. Can you forget to die?
Can you forget to live?
How do you find peace of mind?
Oh, well, either a shot of tequila or relaxing in the sun.
Nice. If you were walking down the street today and you met yourself as a 12-year-old, what would you say to your 12-year-old self?
Courage.
Great. I love that word in your brief. You create what you resist is a saying. Bob Goldthwait morphed it into you are what you hate. James Joyce said it's a curious thing how your mind is super saturated with the religion in which you say you disbelieve. And Louis Buñuel nailed it. He said, thank God I'm an atheist. How do you react to this saying, you create what you resist, or one creates what one resists? Any reaction to that statement?
Well, that is probably a very Zen kind of perspective on things. I think that generally, for every positive thing, there is a negative. And so in that sense, in the kind of the yin and the yang of human experience and of the universe, you can't do one thing without causing something else. Our problem, I think, is that we get stuck having to speak English. You know, we only have one word for snow, right?
Yeah.
We only have one word for love. And we apparently argue about the several words we have for God. None of, I mean, English is an extremely useful, practical language. But we have to borrow from the French to talk about sex. And we have to borrow from the Germans to talk about anything technically specific. You know, you go down the list of the words in our language we had to borrow because English, the good old Anglo-Saxon was only good at mostly talking about animals on the hoof and profanities.
Yeah, I often ask, what do you think we are? Are humans more feeling or more meaning? But what you just brought up reminded me of Bridget Bardot's great quote: "When I make love, I don't think." I said, "Good luck."
Yeah.
James, tell me one major element that's changed and one major element that stayed the same with publishing your amazing newspaper. I give you kudos completely for Random Length News. Amazing. So, one major thing that's changed in the many years and one major thing that stayed the same.
The most significant part of producing a newspaper has gone through 3 or 4 generations of technology, and the question is whether or not a hard copy of anything is going to survive the digital age. What has stayed the same is that people still want to know something. People still look for people who are more knowledgeable than they are, and people are still looking for somebody to trust. And the idea of a newspaper, I mean, we may end up with having a newspaper that it sort of looks like something on Harry Potter. Do you remember in the Harry Potter movies where they actually had the guy open it up and there's like talking people there and all this kind of stuff? Well, believe me, I don't think we're too far away from that.
Yeah.
I mean, you'd be able to pull up your cell phone and have a sort of a 3D experience of reading a newspaper, and Harry Potter's going to be sitting there talking to you about the latest magic. So the technology will change human beings, as we've come to learn recently, adapt, but their fundamental psychology stays the same. I mean, we're still dealing with the psychology of what the Greeks and the Romans had to deal with in terms of fundamentals of populism and democracy and tyranny. Those we haven't evolved much beyond that.
Really well put. We're coming to a close here, James. It's been an honor and a pleasure, and I've learned a lot, and you've really been generous and articulate. Thornton Wilder said in 1928, art is confession. Art is the secret told, but art is not only the desire to tell one's secret, it's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time. You've laid your cards out on the table for 85 minutes, and I'm really grateful. So I'm not implying you haven't done this. What's it really all about for you?
Well, again, what you're talking about is what you referred to earlier with Faulkner. And that is, how do you tell a truth by lying? Right? Yeah. We're back. We're coming full circle around here. And the truth of the matter is that certain types of art are only as good as the artist allows himself to be intimate and vulnerable. And it's something that is not inherently taught in how you are trained as a musician or or an artist or anything else. And yet, if you observe some of the best artists, the people who you respect the most, what you will find is that there is this sort of sense of intimacy and vulnerability that is part of the thing, which is probably why so many artists end up with drug problems or crazy stuff. The Michael Jackson or the Prince, or and a lot of that kind of stuff. And I think it takes a certain amount of maturity to be able to handle the nuance of being able to be both vulnerable and protective at the very same time.
Can art making be egoless?
Oh, I kind of doubt it. I think there are some people that maybe Indian sand painters or something. If you were doing maybe I don't even think the Spanish cavemen cave painters were egoless. There was probably a certain amount of prestige to be able to paint the bison on the wall and be the guy who like said, "Boy, I saw that bison." This is everybody's going, "Ooh,"
That's one of McLuhan's favorite lines is, "The Balinese have no word for art. They do everything as well as they can."
Well, it's sort of like it's sort of presumed in their culture. Just there's probably certain things that are presumed in our culture that it's just sort of like it's just sort of there. So tell me one thing before we go. How did you find Random Lengths amongst all of the digital stuff out there in the universe?
I've been in Venice for 40 years. I was raised in Flint, Michigan in 53, born, went to Ann Arbor, been an activist all my life, and followed Art Kunkin in all the great underground newspapers, studied them all. And yours rates way up there. I know Walter Board, who started the first underground newspaper with Ishmael Reed and the East Village Other. So I rate yours high. I found it on the streets where it should be. I do events at Beyond Baroque. Every issue should be there next to Change Links. But to tell you the truth, I recently dumpster dove a copy in Venice, and I've always wanted to see more copies here, but it's rare. So I haven't seen a copy in probably 10 or 15 years. But because someone threw one out in their garbage can recently, it reminded me, I've been wanting to interview James for 20 years. So,
well, I tell you, if you can always subscribe.
I know I'm a cheap mother. So here's the last couple questions. And I, again, thank you for being dedicated to all your three major art forms. What's the healthiest cultural shift you see developing today?
The diversity of people that came out in the Black Lives Matter protests.
Yeah.
It wasn't. I mean, just the range of ages, colors, and perspectives. I think actually shocked the consciousness of America.
Yeah. Real important. I'm really happy that The three women who started Black Lives Matter are really smart, and I'm glad that it made an impact on me and you.
Yeah. You know, talking about Art Kunken, about 20 years ago, Art Kunken came and visited my office. And when we did our, I think it was our 25th anniversary edition. See, this is why you need to subscribe. When we did our 25th anniversary edition, we have a quote from Art Kunken talking about, you know, what he thought about our newspaper.
Nice. Well, in closing, I thank you, James. The last question is, and I hope we can continue this discussion in many forms in the future. What gives you the most optimism?
Well, when Bernie Sanders was running for president the first time, you know, each assembly district in California holds these caucuses in which they vote for the delegates that actually determine the electoral vote in a state. And ours was held up in Carson. And there were all of these, you know, sort of progressive type people that were, you know, organizing the thing. And they elected me, or maybe chose me, to be the convener. I'd never known that they actually had conveners for these caucuses.
Yeah.
And so I accepted. And I was standing up there, you know, gaveling the meeting. And there must have been some 26 people who were running to be the caucus representatives, you know, for the state. And it hit me like right in the forehead. I looked down and there were all of these young brown and black and white young kids. And tears almost came to my eyes. I said, you know, I've been waiting for you people to show up since the end of the Vietnam War. And now you're here.
What a great note to end on. And that's only the beginning. James, thank you so much. I always know the interview went well when I tear up and the other person tears up. That really touched me deep in my heart. Youth is the mean, and that's why we got Clinton, because he knows which button to push. So he's the youth. Thank you so much, James, and thank you, Clinton.
Okay. Take care. Good night.
Thank you.